Okay, so welcome to GS Analyst, and today we will start with one IR topic, that is war crime, possibility by Russian attacks in Ukraine. So, is it a war crime? That is what the question is. Is it a war crime? Right. So I'll like to explain you and take you back into the overall story of the war, because war itself is not a crime. Therefore, you have to add crime into it. Getting the point? So, war is the fact of international relations, and as such, nobody says that war is a crime. War is bad, undesirable, but not illegal, not unfounded. But if you do something crime in the war, then it becomes war crime. So the whole theories go that about the two things, about two premises. Number one premise is that war is inevitable, war will happen, war is as old as the humans, and war will remain in society, in community of nations, as long as the humans will survive on this earth. So war to hoga. The second premise is that therefore there has to be something like ethics of war. And ethics of war means why you start a war, how you conduct a war, and how you behave after the end of the war. So before war, during war, and after war, conduct of the nation states who are going to have a war will determine whether the war was fought ethically or not. It sounds quite ironical that we are thinking about the ethical war, because as such violence and war which causes destruction and death must be considered purely illegal, unethical, but we have to also see the reality and the balance the reality with ethics or norms, and therefore we have the concept like a just war theory. So the just war theory means war has to be justified in all its premises. So what does just war theories mean? That if a country who is in war, party to the war, does something which cannot be justified, that was not actually the way war should be fought, if the conduct of the parties to the war is not what a civilized person will do war with, then such things can be included into the category of war crimes. Right. So, for example, why you start a war should itself be a justified phenomenon. So, starting a war for self-defense, starting a war for defeating the enemy who has attacked you already, starting a war to prevent some major threat to your country, which is going to happen, which is for sure, you are sure with your intelligence report and analysis, right? All these kinds of war are justified wars in international relations. But if you start a war to just for no other reason than acquiring a foreign territory or exploiting the natural resources of the other country, these kinds of war are not justified, right? Similarly, how the war is conducted. So use of force in the war should be proportional to the goal of the war. You cannot simply use any kind of force or missiles or weapons against the enemy. It has to be proportional in nature, proportional to the power of the enemy. Right? Now the second is that the war should not be against the civilians or minorities or civil infrastructure such as hospitals and the schools, etc., etc. So, so if during the conduct of the war, ethnic cleansing or some kind of genocide or some kind of abhorrent actions by soldiers and army commanders against the humanity kind of crimes like rape, if they are committed, then they are called war crimes. They are called war crimes. And if it is declared war crime, again I'll repeat what is war crime. If any party to the war commits genocide, ethnic cleansing, or crimes against humanity like rape, enslavement of people, sex slave, or something like that, it is called war crime as per the International Criminal Court jurisdiction and the charter. What if somebody commits a war crime? What can you do? What international community can do? Of course, number one, UN Security Council can pass a resolution and then can use force to stop the war crime by any invading army or the party which is committing the war crime. So UN Security Council always have the possibility to use force, but then we know very clearly that UN Security Council doesn't work when veto power members are involved. Here Russians are involved, so UN Security Council cannot work. Then there can be the second option by United Nations to establish special tribunals to go for the investigation and the punishment of the war crimes, if any. Like we had established Nuremberg trial, Tokyo trial, a kind of thing. Bosnian trials in Yugoslavian riots and the wars. So we can also do that. Next is that we can send such matter to International Criminal Court, but we have to understand International Criminal Court, which was established in 2003, has a very limited jurisdiction. It cannot actually punish, enforce whatever the enforcement order it gives in its judgment. So ICC will have almost no possibility to enforce its order even if the war crime has been committed. And practicality of the situation is ICC or any country will never have access to Putin if he has committed war crime. Right? So with only these 3-4 options of punishing the war criminals, there are limited scope. Now the question is Russia committing a war crime? I will give arguments from the both sides. I will give argument that yes, war crime may have been committed. अगर आप अमेरिका और वेस्टर्न पावर्स की बात करें तो वॉर क्राइम हो रहा है. आप रशियंस और उनके सिंपैथाइजर्स की बात करें तो वॉर क्राइम नहीं हो रहा है. So let's try to understand the arguments from both sides, and first is yes, the war crime is happening. So war crime is happening because there are more than one examples of Russian missile attack, Russian forces attack on schools and hospitals where civilians have been killed. There are more than one examples of Russians. The argument is that Russia is using the fabrication of the false stories actually to declare a war or increase its power against Ukraine. For example, the latest debate is around the Russian claim that US was helping Ukraine in creating a chemical biological weapon kind of thing. And if chemical biological weaponry is right, then Russians are right in the attack. And if it is false and fabricated, then Russians are using this as the alibi to justify their actions in Ukraine. Right. Third argument for the war crime is that disproportionate use of the force. Disproportionate use of the force. So Russians using their power much beyond what is required to fulfill their goals in Ukraine can be one of the arguments. Can be. And finally, the intention of launching war on Ukraine by Russia itself is not justified, because Ukraine as such was not at all a threat to Russian security and survival. And therefore, the intention is nothing but the power maximization, territorial gain. And anyway, they have taken Crimea, and maybe now they will take few more areas. And territorial acquisition as the motive of power is not a just war. That can be there. Now, those who say that there are not any such reports of a war crime category very specifically. So, arguments that no, it is not a war crime. It is not a war crime. Why so? Point number one. Point number one. That war crime is very specifically defined in the International Criminal Court, and war crime means only three things: genocide, ethnic cleansing, or crimes against humanity. And Russian army is not involved in any of these kind of things in Ukraine, so this cannot be case of the war crime. Second, Russia had enough provocation from Zelensky and Ukrainian government. He is warning Ukraine since 2008 that it is not at all in the interest of the Russian security that Ukraine should try to join American NATO and invite military weapons. And balance of power and sphere of influence for great powers are considered purely legitimized way of their national security. अमेरिका 100 बार कर चुका है, तो ये कोई गलत नहीं माना जाता, ये कोई गलत नहीं माना जाता. ठीक है. Third thing, that Putin has made it very clear that acquisition of Ukraine into Russia, annexation of Ukraine is not the goal, means territorial gain as such is not the goal. Third is, Russian army is advancing very slowly. Many people have criticized Russia कि इतना धीरे चल रहे हो, यूक्रेन ने रोक दिया. It means Russians are not at all in hurry, and therefore Russian forces are taking care that human corridors, evacuation process, and minimum damage to civilian population, giving a prior warning to civilian population to leave the area. All these things are being followed very stringently by the Russian forces. So there is no question of war crime. There is no question of war crime. Right? And there is no such report of rape or sexual slavery or maiming of the limbs of civilian population or unnecessary or deliberate use of bombs and weapons against civilian population or hospitals. So therefore, there cannot be any issue of war crime. War crime. So with this, we need to understand that war crime has become an important issue of debate, but then we have to know the arguments. That's it. Nothing more than that. Nothing more than that. Okay.